Go. So just to give you a bit of an idea of who is speaking today, we've got Nikki Sinclair. We're actually starting off with Claire Simons, who is from Planning Democracy, as you know. Then we're moving on to Nikki Sinclair, who'll give us a brief talk, and Sarah is going to cover some of the basics of local development planning. And then we're going to hand over to our special guest, who is Nick Wright, who I will introduce when he comes around. So thanks very much. The introductions are coming in. It's really good. Some familiar names. A lot of you have been to all of these before, so you'll find the introductions pretty familiar. I'll start just by welcoming you to this. This is actually the fourth of the series of webinars. I think Barry will be able to put into the chat the link if you want to watch the previous ones to have a bit of a catch up. We have one more planned. It's not yet on our website. We've got a potential date of the 6th of March, still to be confirmed. We'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of, as soon as we know when it is, we'll send it round. This is, Claire has organised this, the coming up one. It's going to be with a couple of chief planners who have very kindly agreed to come and speak to us from the point of view of the local authorities on local development planning. And we're really looking forward to that. I think it'll be an amazing opportunity to help us work out how best to work with planners, to engage with their teams, understand the pressures and realities of their world, and help us work more collaboratively. So please do come along to that. We'll keep you updated. Now, my task is to introduce APRS, which, as you know, is Scotland's countryside charity. Nikki is in our team, and is Sarah, and Barry is helping with the slides. And Nikki particularly has been working on planning issues for a very long time, particularly helping people in green belts and work around planning issues. And we work very, very closely with Planning Democracy and Claire Simon. Sorry, I'm having a brain thing there. Simons, who is speaking now. Now, Planning Democracy has been around 15 years. They were set up to help people who are struggling with the justice around the planning systems. They campaign, but they also help people. And I'll pass on to Claire, who is our next speaker, to fill in the gaps. Claire, welcome.
Thanks. Just for everybody's purposes, it's Claire Simons. Yeah, a lot of you will know that we're a community-based grassroots organisation, and we campaign for a planning system that works for both people and planet. And so we've been doing a lot of work on planning reforms in the past, and a national planning framework before. And now we're really working to involve people more in local development plans. And we're also trying to see how much NPF4 is delivering on its policies, because we put so much hard work into making sure that those policies were as robust as we could get. And we're doing a bit of community-led research on this. We've had a bunch of very brilliant community researchers looking through hundreds of applications to see whether policy 3 on biodiversity is being achieved. So we will be hosting a parliamentary event on the 20th of February, sponsored by Ariane Burgess, MSP, who's responsible for the parliamentary oversight of NPF4. So we'll be featuring that and hosting a lot of communities who will be speaking out about their experiences of planning post NPF4. So if you wish to be involved in that event, please get in touch with Planning Democracy to find out about that. So now if you would like to go on to my slides. Yes. So if you're attending this webinar, I'm assuming that most of you have pretty good idea of what a local development plan is, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on, and Nikki and Sarah are going to be focusing on, and then we will be coming on to Nick Wright, who will be talking more about local place plans. As you know, the Scottish planning system is described as being plan-led, and that means that planning decisions are guided by a development plan. And in Scotland, the statutory development plan includes the National Planning Framework 4, which is the Scottish government policies saying what kind of development's acceptable, and a local development plan, which is produced by every local authority that helps guide planning decisions. So planning authorities are required by law to provide opportunities for the public to get involved in the preparation of those development plans. However, the law doesn't detail how they should do this, or indeed how well they should do this. And a lot of this can be found in the guidance, the government guidance, which we will send to you in an email after this webinar. So in the new system, since the 2019 Planning Act, we've got different process for local development plan preparation. And unlike previous plans, these local development plans, or LDPs as I will call them, will guide planning decisions for the next decade. So they're 10-year plans. And all authorities have to produce a new plan by 2028. So there will be, after this, there will be possibly no opportunity or limited opportunities to influence your local development plans once they've been adopted. And some areas like East Lothian, Glasgow, Clackmannanshire, Mid Lothian, West Lothian are among the ones that are well on their way to starting the initial stages, or beginning to finish the initial stages. So it's well worth having a look at each local development plan scheme. That sets out the timetable for the LDP preparation process. And it also contains a participation statement, which shows how the local authority intend to engage with communities. And we will send you a link to all of the development plan schemes so you can find the relevant one for your local authority and find out the timetabling. So next slide, please, Barry. So the local development plan engagement, should you be bothered, should you spend all your time doing this, it's a big effort, it's a prolonged process, takes 3 to 4 years to develop these plans. And you have to be on your guard for potentially some good or bad surprises throughout the process. It's pretty challenging to know what to say and input. We hope this session might help with that a bit. But you know, we know that sometimes your input can be dismissed by the stroke of an official's pen. So sometimes it's a case of vigilance for a pretty long-term process, tracking what you've said and seeing whether it's been included. So it possibly might need a team of you. But Nikki and I were thinking of all the reasons why you should be doing this. You know, one of the key reasons I think is to strengthen, I think it's next slide actually, Barry, to strengthen the existing policies. So although some of the MPF policies are very good, they might be less detailed, or they might be new, they might be ignored a bit more easily. For example, the biodiversity policies are pretty strong in MPF4, but they're not detailed, they're not locally relevant. So you can sort of improve on these at a local level through the local development plan. We also, although we have a plan-led system, as I've explained before, we also have a discretionary planning system, so that future applications and proposals that don't conform to the plan can be given permission if material considerations are put forward and they're seen as a significant reason to allow a development to go ahead, even though it might not be in keeping with the plan. And this discretionary element is very confusing and can create a good deal of uncertainty. And of course, we have no safety net because there is no right of appeal to challenge decisions. So we have to make sure that the policies in our local development plan are pretty robust enough to prevent these sorts of departures away from the plan from happening. But I think you can also see it as a bit of a campaign, a broader campaign to save the environment, to look after biodiversity and think about climate. And you can see it as a bit of a campaign to change people's priorities. And I think, you know, change doesn't happen unless you say something. And I think the LDP is a really good conduit to get change. Currently, you know, we're in a world where focus of planners, focus of the world perhaps, is to facilitate rather than regulate development activity because it stimulates economic growth. So development is often seen as a good thing because it makes our economy grow, even though you know, in NPF4, it's stating that biodiversity and climate should be a priority. It's still very much based on a growth model where the presumption is in favour of development. But with these biodiversity and climate crises so important, we really need a fundamental shift in mentality and a movement from the ideology of endless growth and development to a planning system where we start to talk about limits to growth and limits to development. Housing is a classic example where the narrative put forward by the house builders is very much we need to allocate huge swathes of land in order to build houses because we need more houses. But only a small proportion of these will be affordable, and it's very much caters to the homeowners. So in the climate emergency, we need to limit the number of houses being built. We need to be more efficient with the housing that we're putting out there. And we need to start talking about limiting and building the type of houses we need rather than what the market is demanding. So essentially, we need a paradigm shift, and you don't get that kind of change unless we start, you know, putting our opinions forward at every opportunity. And the local development plan is one of those. And of course, there are powerful, profit-focused and well-funded vested interests, volume house builders, increasingly the renewable sector, really lobbying for their interests. So part of your involvement is spotting their proposals, what they're saying, and possibly countering it. But also the opposite is possible too, putting your community views forward and coming up with positive ways of meeting your area's needs. And I think that's very much what Nick's going to be talking about with local place plans as well. So with regard to the LDP, watch out for developers putting in proposals for allocations and developments that don't fit with the best interests of the community at the last moment of each stage. They often wait till the last minute before they put their stuff in. So it's worth sort of gearing up to the end stage of each process, each stage. So, for example, this might be mean keeping an eye out for the housing land requirement figures and what's being said around those. And I think you really need to watch out for papers going to the council about how the local authority is going to meet the minimum all tenure housing land requirement, or the MATLA, as we've been calling it. So how much land is going to be allocated for housing is set in NPF4 under this MATLA. But the local authority can still adjust this figure and exceed it in their local housing land requirement, in their local development plans. So in a paper that recently went to Midlothian Council from planners, they set out the options as to whether to use existing figures to reduce or to increase them. And of course, the Homes for Scotland representations very much push for further increases in what is already a hugely generous amount of land being put forward. So I think it's up to us to kind of counter those and make sure, put the arguments around climate forward. So for those of you concerned about the level of volume house building going on, it's worth finding out whether there's any advisory groups feeding into those kind of decisions. Often in the past, local authorities have had these. Of course, they've often got Homes for Scotland representatives on them who are asking for the requirements to be higher. But it could be that you ask for a community rep to go onto those committees that are advising about housing numbers if you feel confident enough about those. But at least putting forward the climate impact arguments forward. And finally, the emphasis on biodiversity in policy is new. So you know, the strength of the biodiversity policies and the fact that, you know, they're talking about a biodiversity crisis. So I think it's all to play for. And you know, it's really going to be up to us to speak up for it, because there aren't enough employed ecologists or environmental experts to cover it. So we must push for it to raise its profile in planning, and increase the planners' priority to protect the environment. In our research that I was talking about, that we've done with our fantastic community volunteers, looking at these hundreds of decisions that have been made since NPF4 was adopted, is showing that actually there's very little change in behaviour or thinking about biodiversity since NPF4. I don't know whether this is due to lack of knowledge or lack of understanding about it, but it's clearly not happening. So we absolutely need to be pushing and changing this, and pushing biodiversity right up the local planners' priority lists, helping them to understand it, detailing what we have, what we shouldn't lose, but importantly, giving them ideas on how to enhance and improve the biodiversity. It's a bit of a community education project, if you ask me, in biodiversity. But we ourselves need to be more aware of what we have. We need to reconnect with nature. A lot of us did over COVID, but our understanding of nature is not always what it should be. And this is your opportunity to find out more about your local ecology, and also to help the planners understand it better and feel moved to protect it. Now, the Scottish guidance on local development plans does provide some good information. And I think, yep, thank you, Barry, you've just put that in the chat. And it's your opportunity to, it's really quite good. It tells you all about what is required by the legislation on the different policy areas, and where to go for other sources of information. So, for example, in the biodiversity one, it's you know, you can go and see it. You can see that it suggests looking at the local biodiversity action plans. It shows you about the biodiversity records data, and so it's your opportunity for you to get to know about these and help you to identify areas and species that need protecting, and these will be helpful tools to enable you to do that. And then you can physically go and check some of those sites out, invite others, invite your local councillors to come along, and make sure that the policies there are in your local development plan to ensure these species and habitats are recognised and protected, and there is a plan to enhance them as well. And that way you can learn, you can use your knowledge in different ways and pass on that knowledge in other ways as well. So that was a whistle-stop tour. Hope you feel moved to get engaged in your local development plan process. I'm going to hand you over to Nikki, who will explain a little bit more about the detail of that process. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, I'm just going to give a quick bit of context on where we are with LDPs and what we mean by new style when we're talking about them. And so probably add a little bit of context to what some of what Claire's said already. So partly due to their needing to sit alongside NPF4, and partly due to other legislative changes, the next round of LDPs are going to be a bit different to those that have gone before. The regulations came out last year, and the guidance is a picture of the front cover here, and the link's already in the chat to that. And Claire's told you a bit about it already. New style plans have to be in place around May 2028 everywhere. Oh, something's happening. Whose screen is that? Thank you for that, Barry. They have to last 10 years, as Claire said, rather than 5. It might be possible to amend them during that period, but the government, I think, has to introduce new regulations to enable that to happen. So that still remains to be done. There's meant to be increased public engagement. The government consulted on guidance for local authorities on engagement last year, but they haven't published the final guidelines yet. There's a different approach to some policy areas, particularly housing, yes, and they don't need to repeat the national policies that are already in NPF4. So in theory, they could be a bit shorter than before. So there's obviously an ongoing cycle of a local authority adopting a new plan and then immediately starting on its successor. So it's pretty much a continuous process. And there were lots of local authorities working on new LDPs all the time NPF4 was being drafted. So it's quite sensible to ask, where do these all sit now? And I think the next slide shows you an example of Edinburgh, and City Plan 2030 is currently at examination, so it should be nearly finished. Its development was informed by the backdrop of NPF4 being consulted on and then written, but it's not necessarily aligned with it, as when City Plan 2030 was written, it had to comply with Scottish Planning Policy 2014. So it's at examination. Presumably some of the differences in policy with NPF4 will be ironed out during that process, but probably not all of them. And meanwhile, early engagement has recently started on the new style LDP, which will be City Plan 2040. And there's other examples like Scottish Borders, Argyll and Bute and Aberdeen. All of these were written and developed to the proposed plan stage or further by the time NPF4 was adopted. And until they are replaced with new style plans, they will have to rub along with NPF4 as best they can. So we're currently in what the Chief Planner has referred to as a transition period between one style of LDPs and the new ones. The Chief Planner wrote a letter last February with transitional arrangements in it in order to support consistencies, and that confirmed that LDPs already adopted will continue to be part of the development plan with NPF4, and for the avoidance of doubt said existing LDP land allocations will be maintained. So while we're in this transition period, there's inevitable debate about the implementation of NPF4 with old LDPs, especially over some policy areas where NPF4 has brought a big change of approach, such as on housing land. And that's been particularly highlighted by the appeal to the Court of Session over the Scottish Government turning down a planning appeal by Miller Homes. That's over Moss End in West Lothian. It was heard last week and the decision should be out, I suppose, fairly soon. Quite clearly with quite old LDPs or even recently adopted old style plans, there could be incompatibilities between them and policies in NPF4. The 2019 legislation allowed for this and made clear that whichever of the LDP or NPF4 is the later in date is to prevail. Actually, Barry, could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, there you go. So whichever of the LDP or NPF4 is the later in date is to prevail. So this applies where the policy in NPF4 differs from that in the LDP so much that they can't coexist, they can't rub along at all. And an example might be on exceptional release of land for housing policies in some of the old LDPs and what might trigger the release. It's likely to be very different from what's in policy 16 in NPF4. It's also worth emphasising, and Claire mentioned it slightly, that the incompatibility provisions apply in the future too. So if LDPs adopted after NPF4 are found to have incompatible provisions, the newer LDP provisions would prevail. So there's an opportunity for new LDPs to go further than NPF4, say, maybe on biodiversity or energy or housing in the countryside, if there's evidence that that is needed in the area covered. And there's an opportunity then for people to feed into that process and hopefully influence the outcomes for their areas too. So a quick reminder of the stages in producing a new LDP. The Planning Minister said last year that it's crucial that community involvement is front-loaded and happens at the earliest opportunity. So the most obvious stages for members of the public to engage with the process should be circled, I think, if we can move on. And that would be for early engagement with data collection during the evidence gathering stage at the start. So that's really when the council is looking at what to plan for and what evidence they need. When they produce an evidence report, that then has to be sent to the Scottish Government for a gate check, which is a new process. And only if the evidence gathering is considered to be adequate will they get the go-ahead to produce a proposed plan. The first evidence reports are expected to be submitted to the gate check a little bit later this year. And once the proposed plan is written, the planning authority is required to consult the public about it for at least 12 weeks. So that's the most formal consultation point. Proposed plans can potentially then be amended before the plan goes to examination and then eventually on to adoption alongside a delivery programme. So that's the main two opportunities to engage, but there's a couple of other stages where you might be able to input if you want to. And one Claire mentioned earlier, which is the participation statement, which is in the development plan scheme, covers how and when engagement will take place. And when it's first published, you can comment on it if you want to. And local authorities will also run a call for ideas, or they could run a call for ideas. It's not a statutory part of the process, but it would have to happen ahead of the proposed planned stage. And responses can be from anyone, not just developers, and they don't just have to be about allocating sites. It's quite similar to the old LDP process, which was called a call for sites, but that was more limited than this is intended to be. And of course, the alternative way of engaging with the LDP process is for your community to produce and register a local place plan in time for it to be considered as part of the LDP development process. But now I'm going to hand over to Sarah for a bit more detail on engaging with LDPs.
Thank you. So on early engagement, more specifically, these consultations are done as a series of surveys focusing on different aspects of a place, but they can also include other engagement strategies like drop-in sessions or public meetings to gather views. But it's up to the discretion of a local authority whether they want to do these additional events. If there is something you think would be particularly effective in engaging people in your community, so like if you live in an area with low internet access or use, mention this in the participant statement consultation and your local authority might do it. But the main aim of this stage is to gather your experience of living or working or visiting a place and how you feel about your local area, the access you have to certain facilities and any other areas like that. They can also gather ideas on how your area can be improved. So APRS have actually prepared a checklist on the policies outlined in NPF board to give you an idea of the kind of topics you can raise in your responses and what your LD should be covering. But what's most important will depend on where you are, your experience of living there, what you feel about your local area and your ideas and how it can be improved. And here you can cover as like many or as few topics as you like, as the surveys usually cover quite a few different topics. So as a bit of background, there are different kinds of surveys that can be asked here. So the Your Place or the Place Standard survey can have slightly different names, but they're more general surveys of your experience living or working in a place. Place efficiency assessments look at the availability, quality, and accessibility of communities' open spaces and play opportunities for children and young people. And I think this has to be done. Topic papers often cover themes like the climate and biodiversity crisis, woodland soils, and identify places where the spatial strategy needs to be really carefully considered within the context of each topic. And your local authority can open these up to comment. And then the topic paper can be modified, or in cases where it's not possible, you can raise a dispute. Some local authorities do separate surveys for children and young people, and many also seek the views of businesses and organizations who have a stake in the area. And then as a bit of background, the more general Your Place surveys are based on the Place Standard tool, which allows people to think about both the physical aspects of a place and the social aspects of a community. And this aims to identify the aspects of a place that need to be targeted and improved. And then after the early engagement stage, the local authority produces an engagement report, as Nikki mentioned. And this kind of just details the trends in the comments and ideas of respondents. Then, as Nikki mentioned, the call for ideas is kind of amending a previous stage. So unlike the previous planning system, this should be open to everyone to propose ideas for any aspect of the plan, and it's not specifically limited to suggestions for development sites or different types of development. So in theory, this could be used to preserve green spaces for biodiversity enhancement or public amenity, but we're not really sure how this is going to play out in reality until we get there, I think. The proposals submitted at the call for ideas should support the preparation of the spatial strategy within the proposed plan. And there is no strict time for issuing a call for ideas stage. So some local authorities do it earlier during the early engagement stages and some after the gate check. And while this is not part of the official process, it is one of the key ways that developers have their says. And as I mentioned before, in the previous system, only developers could respond to a call for sites. And essentially, in the previous system, when only developers could respond, this essentially allowed them to undermine the statutory consultation process. So this call for ideas remains an informal stage, but in theory has been opened up to communities, though it is a key stage for developers to get their sites allocated. So we do need to make sure that people are proactive in saying what sites they don't want developed. And while this is important, it can also be really difficult to keep track of every site that could possibly be allocated for development. So in our next webinar in March, we're going to be hearing from local authority planners. So we'll be asking them how communities are supposed to know what sites could have been suggested for by developers. So after this, the local authority will publish a proposed plan, the evidence report, and the delivery program, which outlines how the local authority will implement the proposals. As Nikki mentioned, this consultation must last at least 12 weeks. Some local authorities might accept responses after this if you ask nicely. And they'll also consult on the strategic environmental assessment alongside this, which considers the environmental impacts of their plan. And they can also consult on any other impact assessments relevant to this plan, like the Fair Scotland duty or the Children's Rights and Wellbeing Assessment. A lot of local authorities use a form to guide you through this process. Some others do through email and some accept both. And after the consultation process, the public authority will publish a report of the modifications so you can see any changes that have been made and if any of your suggestions have been taken up. So as opposed to the early engagement then, during the proposed plan consultation, there's more scope for making reference to NPF4 policies and specific changes that you would like to make. So these can be related to the draft policy proposals, how sites are allocated for development, or the objectives of the goal of the plan. And here it's also important to remember that you're amending the proposed plan, so it might be more effective to respond with that in mind rather than just general comments. When proposing these changes, reference specifically what in the plan you're talking about and note the chapters and policies and sites, and making specific reference to NPF4 as well as other relevant guidance I'll mention later can potentially be really valuable here, as it shows that your proposals align with broader Scottish Government aims. So if we look at the biodiversity policy then, it details how this policy is relevant to LDPs, as do all policies in NPF4. And when you're looking at a proposed plan, you can see whether the plan meets these objectives. So these can be good prompts for seeing whether the LDP aligns with the policies that matter to you and whether you can make your response relevant to NPF4. So looking at this, it says that the LDP should protect, conserve, restore, and enhance biodiversity. So when you're looking at your proposed LDP, you can think about whether the LDP protects existing biodiverse species from development that may damage it, or whether it identifies areas where degraded habitat can be restored, and so on. Also on biodiversity, there is more guidance issued by Nature Scott called Developing with Nature, which we will send out after this. And then, so there's two main aspects of the proposed plan: policies and the spatial strategy, and you can respond to both of these. As an example of this, we can look at the proposed Greenbelt plan in Edinburgh City Plan 2030, which is part of the old system, but we'll just do it as an example. So this is okay, but could be strengthened. So policy 8 of NPF4 deals with green belts. So in the response I wrote here, I drew on that, as well as policy 20, which centers around local living and 20-minute neighborhoods, which the current policy doesn't touch on a huge amount, to get that there should be a presumption against development in the green belt, except in cases outlined in policy 8A of NPF4. They should also aim to encourage high quality localized settlements and a 20-minute neighborhood where possible, and discourage a dependency on car-based commuting, as outlined in policy 20 of NPF4, and is becoming an increasing issue in Edinburgh. The LDP should also notice that the continued protection of the designated greenbelt area is essential to retaining a high quality urban area. So that's just an example of the way you can kind of think about responding to policy proposals. This spatial strategy then is from North Lanarkshire's current plan, which came into force in 2022, and was also part of the current system, but I'm just using it as an example. So the darker green area is greenbelt, and the purple is allocated for industrial development. So though some of this industrial area was greenbelt previously. So if you disagreed with this allocation, you could note the reference number on the site in your response and outline your reasoning and evidence for wanting this change. And a lot of local authorities have separate spatial strategy documents from the local development plan, so finding this can all be sometimes challenging. So NPF4 sets out a distinct new approach to planning for new homes across Scotland that aims to deliver more quality homes that meet diverse needs. So policy 16, which is quality homes, promotes a plan-led approach. So new style LDPs must include targets for meeting the housing needs of people living in the area, and this is referred to in NPF4 as the local housing land requirement, or LHLR. And it's expected that the LHLR will exceed the minimum all tenure housing land requirements that are set out in NPF4, but it's still kind of unclear as to how much that will be exceeded by. So the size of the LHLR, so the number of housing units, will affect how much extra land is allocated for the 10-year period of the LDP for building new housing. And this can obviously place huge pressure on greenfield or undeveloped sites if it's very big. But alternatives to new build on greenfield sites are also possible. So like appropriate brownfield sites, existing buildings, utilizing empty homes, reducing short-term lets, and ensuring that homes are affordable. So if these are issues in your area, or the proposed plan overlooks these opportunities to improve our housing and where we live, you can set those out in your engagement responses. But make sure that the needs of your communities are pushed, not just what developers want to sell. So how do you know when any of this is happening? Well, the best way to stay informed on this is to sign up to your local authorities, LDP or planning newsletter, or email alerts, and check the planning system of their website, though this can be a bit of a minefield. So the e-bulletins or newsletters are definitely a good shout. As I mentioned before, planning authorities must consult on proposed plans for a minimum of 12 weeks. The notice of this consultation must be published in local newspapers and on the internet, and also sent to community councils and key agencies. This must also set out where more information on LDPs can be found and how the public can input into the plan. The proposed LDP must also be displayed at an office of the planning authority, on the internet, and at every library in the local authority area. In addition, neighbours that will be significantly impacted by any proposed development must also be noted. And these are all statutory requirements that legally have to be done. Local authorities also often publicize their consultation through their social media, but this is sometimes done through a dedicated planning social media account, so it's best to check whether this is the case for your local authority. You can also try and engage with councillors outside of this process and don't be limited by it. So if you have a vision for your area, or if you really want to prioritize nature, you can always try contacting them directly and not let yourself kind of be limited by this pretty like strict process, really. So at the minute, we're also still unsure about steps that communities can take if they feel that they weren't properly engaged on, but it is still early days of this new system. So I think there's going to be a lot of learning and like seeking out answers as we go. And then finally, we have some other guidance here, which we can send out that some of it is like Scottish Government or NatureScot guidance, which is good to kind of reference and draw from whenever you're responding to a consultation. And then, yes, some of it is from APRS and Planning Democracy. So we'll send all those out later. And I think we're going to have a few questions now.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. You did so much work on that. And I'd really like to especially say well done to Sarah for catching up from basically a level of not knowing about this because she was working on the deposit return scheme to just getting up to speed with this and now knowing more than anyone else, it seems, about this. So well done, Sarah. Thank you so much for your work on that. Thank you to Claire. Thank you to Nikki for that. So we've had a few questions that have come in already. So I'm going to direct some of them to Claire just now, and then we're going to pass on to Nick, and then I've got a few more to pass to Nick when he's spoken. So let me find them. So we've got a couple from community councillors. So there's Ellie Burrows and Chris Alcorn. Both of them looking for tips on engaging people. So Ellie says that she's a community councillor and would like tips on how best to engage with a wide range of people from my community. They're hosting conversations supported by the Democracy Matters funding from the Scottish Government, but they'd like to know more. Chris is saying that he's looking for tips on encouraging attendance for residents or surrounding community to come along to sessions. Saturday mornings with free cake, he suggests, that could input to a local place plan. So Claire, do you have suggestions for that?
Thanks. Well, I'm sure Nick will be able to add to this in his presentation or just an answer before he does his presentation. But Ellie, well done for doing Local Democracy Matters. I think that this process, local governance review, could really revolutionise local government. And it's been delayed for a long time now. So, but I think there's commitment from the minister to it now. So, but there's little public awareness of this consultation that's going on around it. So that's really great that you're getting out there and doing Local Democracy Matters workshops. Last webinar, we had a talk from the Tory community who were trying to protect Fittix Park. And they said that they went round knocking on doors, and I don't think you can beat that. Chatting to people, signing people up to do stuff and to get involved. I don't think you can get better than door knocking myself and just having conversations, relationship buildings. I think it gives you energy, it gives you returns. So I really recommend that. However, it's not for everybody, and it can be quite challenging in urban areas, perhaps, or even villages, actually. So I think, Barry, have you got the Cowley Road Matters link? Many years ago, you can see a much younger version of me doing a consultation process. And we used a variety of methods, including participatory video, and we found it very useful to work with different people in different areas to go and consult. So we trained people to go and talk to people about whatever it was we wanted to speak about. So, for example, the Bangladeshis, we got them to go and speak to other members of the Bangladeshi community because we couldn't speak Bangladeshi, you know, we were able to sort of overcome some of the other barriers by working with homeless people and getting them to speak to other homeless people and so on. And we did this using participatory video, you know, handing them a video and getting them to go and film and consult members of their own community. And the fact that we trusted them with the video was a really good trust building exercise as well. So have a look at that video that I did many years ago. but I believe it's still being used as a training tool for the RTPI actually. So so have a look at that, you might get some ideas.
Thank you for that answer, Claire. I've got one more question before we move on to Nick, and then there's a couple of questions about local place plans after that. But Margaret Bennett is asking, many people have experienced consultations only to find their views were completely disregarded. How do we overcome cynicism and apathy and encourage people to engage? Now, I have a bit of, Claire and myself went for a walk with Shivali Fifield of the Environmental Rights Centre Scotland. It was one of my Greenbelt walks just recently, and I've just written it up and it's on the website. And we talked a lot about this because Shivali did her PhD on this kind of consultation, sort of apathy that people get when they get consulted and nothing ever happens. So I'd be really interested to know what Claire's answer to that one is as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't got all the answers, and I'm sure lots of people on this this webinar have got better answers than me. But I think the challenge possibly is to work out why your opinions and views were disregarded. Was it that there were louder voices, vested interests? Was it an admin error? You know, or was it a lack of understanding about the issue? And I think it's quite important if you can find that out, and I understand that it's not always possible to do that. But I think if your views aren't taken into account, it's just follow up, follow up, follow up. Ask, repeat, reframe, keep providing more information, provide more detail, persist. I think that's my answer to that one.
I think that's your code for life as well, Claire, I would say, having got to know you since I started working at APRS. Well, now it's great pleasure for me to introduce Nick Wright. Nick's a chartered town planner, a mediator and facilitator. He worked as a town planner for 15 years, and now he works with communities activists, businesses, artists, civil servants, other planners, in short, anyone who's involved with creating places. He's got a special interest in local place planning. He's got a lot of expertise, and he's here to talk to us about that. He says, and I got this from his website, for me, planning is about shaping our environment for the future. That needs imagination, creativity, and a desire to positively embrace change and risk. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Nick has to say. Over to you.
Thanks, Kat. That's a very flattering introduction. I'm not sure I wrote all that. Anyway, thanks very much. I'm really just a normal town planner, although I'm firmly on the facilitating rather than the regulatory side, as Claire was saying earlier on, using a description there. So thanks for having me along. There is lots of expertise in the room, and I think there are some planners in the room as well. So I am, there's lots of people who know just as much, if not more than I do. Well, I'm sure they will know more than I do about certain aspects of what I'm going to say. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time, not just for questions, but for you to share things that you know amongst each other as well, because I think that's really valuable. Just so you know who I can't say any more about myself because Kat's already said who I am. I'm going to say a little tiny bit about local place plans and the legislation, but just 2 slides, literally. I want to keep that very short. And there isn't actually very much legislation around local place plans, because the beauty of them is really that the requirements in legislation and guidance are minimal compared to local development plans, as we've just heard. And there's a lot of positive experimentation and creativity happening just now in communities all around the country about how to do local place plans. So I'll spend most of the time sharing 3 or maybe 4 examples if I've got time, and I'll try to answer questions that I know have already come in advance of the webinar as well. So I'm doing that. So my idea is not to tell you how to do local place plans, but it's to give you a bit of inspiration from my own experience about how you can be creative and you can do local place plans in different ways, or you might decide that it's not for you and it's not, and that would be a useful outcome as well to help you decide what you do want to do. You might want to focus more on doing a project than doing a plan, for example. So I won't waste any more time saying what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk to some slides as I go through. So I'll share my screen, and hopefully everyone should be able to see that. And of course, I've now lost my notes that I was going to talk to, which isn't very helpful. Can you still see the screen if I'm talking? I hadn't predicted that would happen. Right. Well, anyway,
Yes.
so that's an extract from the government guidance, or from the Act rather, about what local place plans are. That's really all we're told about them. So you can read that for yourself, and you'll see from the second bit of that all the government says is they are to be taken into account in local development plans. So the risk is, of course, that you spend all your time doing a local place plan, and then it gets ignored by the council, and they don't take it into account in doing their LDP. So really, what you want to do is minimize the risk of that happening, and I'll talk about that in the various examples. That's the trick of doing these things, so they get taken seriously. You still won't get everything you want, but I think there's a trick in getting as much as you possibly can. So local place plans. So I think in practice they're about various things. They're about place in its entirety, not just land use planning statutory stuff, and I'll give examples of that. From the government's point of view, they can deliver national agendas like climate change and health and well-being at a local level. Now that's good for local communities because it means you can use them to say support what we're doing because it supports what the government's trying to do, and I'll come back to that as well. You can use them to build consensus, not just amongst the community, although that's very important, but also consensus with the public sector maybe, or the private sector about what they want to do as well, about what's best for the community. You can use them to support getting money for projects and that kind of thing, to support action. And I'm a great believer in that you can use them to guide public services. But that's at an early stage. We're not very far along with that yet. I'm going to put some links in chat a little bit later on to various bits of information about these, but I can't do it as I'm presenting, sorry. So I'll have to do that at the end. So I'm going to talk about, if I get time, I'll talk about all these four, but if we're short, I'll cut it short. So these happen to be 4 local place plans I've been involved with. The Foxbar one I'll talk about first. That was a pilot funded by the government and the local authority. Ardgour is about to be registered. Stratherwick and Foyers is already registered, and the Black Isle is just at draft stage. It's just gone out to the community for comment as a draft plan, so it's nearing the end of the process. But I'll just chat through various bits of each of these. So Foxbar, first of all, I was keen to get an urban one in, so they aren't all rural. Foxbar is a suburb of Paisley. It's on the southwest edge of Paisley. It's got a population of about 7,000 or 8,000, which is similar to the Black Isle, a bit smaller. It's considerably bigger in population than either Ardgour or Stratherwick and Foyers, which are only a few hundred people. So it's so it's a suburb of Paisley, largely social housing, I would guess, but some private housing as well. I'm not going to talk about the consultation process in any great depth, except to say the way that we tried to engage people, which has come from the question already, was trying to get out as much to where people were going out to places. But we did also have some workshops, and we didn't do much online stuff for this. This was back in 2018. We tried to do more face-to-face than online. And these pictures just show you some examples of the kind of thing that we were doing. But we did have a series of drop-in sessions, those pictures on the right there, where we got really to get people talking and to share ideas and get them to hear each other and get some consensus about what to do. I can talk about that in more detail if you want to, but really what I wanted to share from Foxbar was we tried to keep the whole thing really simple. So the plan, and I'll put a link into chat after I finish, the plan is actually really, really straightforward. It just has nine projects, if you like, in it down the left-hand side there, and hardly any of those have anything to do with land use planning in. New homes at the bottom, that certainly does, because that was locations for housing, but a lot of the others don't really have any planning stuff, and some of them aren't even very spatial. So community events, the first one was really about getting the gala day reinstated every year. So not all these things are spatial planning, not all of them are land use planning. I mentioned homes. So again, we kept it really simple. There's one page in the plan for each of those 9 projects. It deliberately doesn't go into great detail. It was just trying to get some consensus on what to do. We have the council involved in this as well as the community. So the project page around the new homes one simply says, look, there are these various sites which are a local priority for the community to get developed because they're eyesores and they need more housing. So that's what that says, but then more detailed work will need to happen after that. And then there's an overall plan, which looks quite fancy. You could do this. So this shows all of the 9 things where they could be located on a plan as far as they could. So things like a cycle track, for example, on those housing sites, and to improve a park in the middle. The plan wouldn't need to be drawn that fancily. So you shouldn't be put off by professional looking plans like this, because you could, if you don't have access to skills to do these things, then you can do them much more simply. They don't have to look as fancy as this. It's to be a community-led plan, a local place plan. So don't be intimidated by fancy looking plans. Second on the lightning tour is Stratherick and Foyers, which was registered by the council, so by Highland Council. It's the first one they had registered a few months ago. It built on a community action plan that was done 2 years earlier. And that community action plan identified a number of themes which are important for the community. And you can see them on the screen there. And the reason that the Community Trust and the Community Council, this was entirely community-led, the reason they wanted to do this was because they've got wind farm money, quite a lot of wind farm money. They're very lucky. And they wanted to work out how to spend that wind farm money. So this was very much what could they do as a community. And the community action plan kind of set the scene, set the priorities, and then the local place plan then worked out how will those things land on the ground? Where will they go? And you can see examples on the screen here in the slides I'm about to show you around the kind of proposals that are contained in both the community action plan and the local place plan. You can see some of these are things that would go onto a map, like play parks, for example, which habitats you might enhance, which paths you might upgrade, which walking and cycling routes you might focus on. Some of them are not spatial, so like a better community transport, a minibus service, that's for the whole area. That's a kind of blanket thing, if you like. And homes, some of these are about specific locations for housing, but really the issue there, as in many places, is about affordable homes and making sure people who live in the area already and work there, or who want to move there to work, they can get housing. And the answer to that isn't just about building houses, it's about the affordability of houses, it's about access to money. So there's lots of, and I'll come back to this a bit later on when we get to Arngower. So those are the kind of things which are in both the community action plan and the local place plan. And what the local place plan tries to do as one of those 2 sister documents is it just has very simple plans of each of the half a dozen villages that are in the area and says, this is how this village could look in the future. So this one for Gorthlick, for example, shows, so in the middle there, number 7, the purple, that's a housing site. It's been a housing site for a long time, actually, not been developed, but the locals were very keen to see that particular site being developed. So that's an obvious one to include in the plan. But there's other things in there which actually won't link into planning policy. So number 2 is making more of the school there, having it open in the evenings, for example, for community activities, having a play area in there as well. That's not something which needs any planning policy change. And also the same for things like speed restrictions through the village and improving safety for kids walking along the road. Those aren't really planning policy things either, but they are about making the place better. So those things are all captured on these really simple maps, which again, these can be done. I mean, that's quite simply done. They could be even simpler than that. So none of these things you need to pay lots of money to do. And if you can do them yourselves, I think that's great. Right. A little bit about how that's being implemented with this rather confusing diagram. So the local place plan at the top has to take account, sorry, that's gone the wrong way. The local place plan at the top has to take account of all the yellow things on the left-hand side. So it has to take account of national planning framework, the local development plan, and other plans and strategies. But also that when those, so there's a circular thing going on. So we all know local place plans should influence the next local development plan, as I'll explain in a second. So that's a given because it's in the legislation, as I said at the start. But I think local place plans should also be influencing the next national planning framework. I know we've only just got one, but there will be a national planning framework 5. And for my money, a lot of the things I'm hearing from communities about affordable housing, for example, there need to be big changes in national planning around enabling more affordable housing. I'll come back to this a bit later on. So I think local place plans should be feeding up into the next national planning framework as well. My kind of idea of all this is just looking at Highland, there are probably dozens of local place plans being produced across Highland just now. Those are all going to be prepared over the next couple of years. So the council should be feeding those up back to Scottish Government to say, look, we need you to change your national planning policy next time round in NPF 5 to do these things. So I think that's how they should be working. And the planners in Highland Council are very up for that. And you can see on here, this is an extract from the council's validation response for the local place plan. And the bits in yellow are the important bits. Now, this is the council volunteering about how they'll use the local place plan, going beyond what they're required to do. So they'll take the plan into consideration when preparing the next LDP, but they have to do that. But they're also making sure that planning colleagues, and I think they mean in development management, will be asked to use local place plans when they're deciding planning applications. So that's very good. That's something the council don't have to do, but they've volunteered to do that. I would hope all local authorities will do that, but you should be pressurizing yours too as well, if you've got local place plans. And on the right-hand side, they're also saying that they'll share the local place plan with other bits of the council, as you can see at the bottom there. And that's important because for things like active travel networks, for example, walking and cycling improvements, or improving play parks, or making more use of the school in Gorthlick, that needs other departments to chip in and to help. So I think the planners in Highland are doing a good job here. Hopefully it will continue. The proof will be in the pudding, so we'll find out. Right, that's Stratherick and Foyers. And have I got time to do one more before going to question? Yeah, can I just do one more quickly? I'll leave the black.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
We've got 25 minutes, so that's, if you skew that, we'll still have at least 20 minutes of questions.
Okay, right. Well, I might leave the Black Isle out. I don't want to get in the way of the discussion. So let me go on to Ardgour then, which is about to be submitted. That's the cover of the draft plan, which the Community Council just signed off a couple of weeks ago. We're just making a couple of final tweaks. For those of you who don't know where it is, it's the other side of the Corran Ferry when you go up from the Central Belt to Fort William. It covers a huge area. It's 60 miles from north to south, but there's only really 2 or 3 villages with about 700 people. So it's pretty remote, and quite a lot of it it doesn't have any people in it. So that's the area there. The process, for those of you who are interested, we did this little diagram that we shared around quite a bit to help people understand the process. You don't need to do yours like this, but this was the approach that we used for Ardgour. And it took a few months to get to the starting point. So even to get to stage 1 that we call preparation, setting up a community sounding board. So the Community Council and the Development Trust who are behind it, they wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as just the same old faces doing the same old thing and telling everyone else what to do. So they set up a sounding board, they called it, a steering group, if you like, where they took a few months basically to go out and get people in who weren't involved in groups already, including the estates as well, from each of the geographical bits of the community council area, different ages, different interests, which we used as a sounding board. So I was helping facilitate all this, which we used as a sounding board to guide how to do the community engagement, not the content of the plan, but how to engage the community. And that was really, really helpful, especially at the start when we were trying to build trust in the process. And what that led to was they helped to write the community survey that we kicked off with at the start, for example, which was delivered to all the houses to make sure that it got out to everybody. They were really, really helpful. And then as time went on, we didn't need the sounding board as much because we were getting more trust from local people. But it was really good at the start. All that work led to a vision, which was tested through the various waves of community engagement. All these things on here are all things that local people expressed. So that kind of formed this vision diagram, if you like, which went into the plan. And the reason that we did that, I mentioned earlier on about trying to make sure that you tie into government agendas and support government agendas. So the reason for this diagram and that previous one is to show, look, what the community wants is along the top: improved services and facilities, better connections, affordable homes for everybody, things around community and culture, including Gaelic, about landscape. That's what the community wants. And hey presto, they fit with the national outcomes in NPF4, which the government's looking for. So therefore, can you support the community to implement the plan? So that's what I was getting at earlier on. So just about how you frame things. I just wanted to mention housing again, because obviously housing is one of the big bits of these plans I'm talking about that will link into planning. So there's a chapter, or there are 4 chapters in the Argyll plan for those 4 columns along there. And this is from the chapter that's about housing. And on the left, it says what we're aiming for. I say we, the community. So that's what the community is aiming for on the left, which will, I'm sure, be common to a lot of communities, although the detail might change. Then a bit about what's already happening at the bottom left, but then importantly, what else is needed to achieve what they're aiming for. And we spent quite a lot of time, when I say we, I mean the community and I spent quite a lot of time working out what are the range of things that we should be doing to really make this happen, because government isn't really doing it, and the council doesn't really have the tools to do it either. So we've got about 20 proposals in here, all of which are based on things that have happened elsewhere. And some of these need changes in national planning policy, as I was saying earlier on. So 7.2 on the right-hand side, the community's aspiration is for new homes to be affordable. Now, we originally wrote that as all new homes should be affordable, but it got watered down because the estates were, well, and some other people thought that was too strong. But it is possible to have a planning policy that says all new homes should be affordable. It's just not happening in Scotland yet, because Wales does have national planning policy that allows that, and Gwynedd and Anglesey in Northwest Wales, they have planning policies and have had for 5 years or so, where any new house has to be affordable, and in fact has to be for local occupation as well. So these things, although we can't do them yet in Scotland, they are done elsewhere. So I've got this kind of dream, if you like, for any community where I'm working anyway, which is really serious about affordable housing, we can use local place plans to try and push for this kind of change in planning policy, plus all the other things which are needed in order to tackle the housing crisis that we've got, really. So that's what we've got in here. We've got all sorts of things about that, some of which, well, very few of which the community can do itself. A lot of these go back to government, and very few, as you can read, are actually related to planning. They're much broader. So that's how that particular community has chosen to tackle the housing issue. Doesn't mean you need to do the same thing. In fact, I would urge you not to. You should do it how you want to do it. If it might be that housing is a different issue, or it's not an issue at all in your place. And then the final bit of Ardgour is we also included plans in there of not for every village, but just how key bits of the area would look. So this is the centre of Clavulin, showing some new houses built there in places that people suggested, which would be workable, making more of the school that's next door, upgrading the community facilities. So improving the centre of the village and making it just work better. And we did similar plans for other bits as well. This is a wider area around Corran Ferry, where we're suggesting to the council, this does link to planning, that the council needs to protect future land that might be required for a fixed link at Corran, be it a bridge or a tunnel. And so we're suggesting there are areas of land which should be protected for that. So that is a planning thing. Now, I'm going to stop there. I think I've thrown an awful lot of information at you, and I'm going to put some links into chat in a second as well, which might be helpful.
Thank you, Nick.
Yes.
So Nick, I think you've done an amazing job at simplifying what sometimes seems like a whole kind of mass of stuff. I think you filled in some of the gaps in my mind as to where's the link between these local place plans and the council kind of role in listening to those. It was really helpful to see those statements by Highland Council, and it'd be really useful to know if other councils are making similar commitments to communities that are making local place plans. I've got a couple of questions that have come in already. Now, if anybody's got questions, please do type them into the chat. It's your chance to speak to Nick. But he's also said that if anybody here has been involved in local place planning in your own communities, that we'd really love to hear your own experiences of that. I've got a very quick question to you, Nick, because it's been running through my mind since I heard about local place plans, which is, if a community, how small can a local place plan be? So you gave a really good example of, like, it's just 4 things in the first one you talked, or the second one you talked about. What if it was just one thing? So what if you've got a community that comes together around the protection of, let's say, a piece of green space close at hand? So, for example, in Ferny Hill, we went up and we visited a space that's important for local people. It's quite a deprived community. There's not a lot of kind of opportunity for sort of community to really do something perhaps as ambitious as a place plan. But could they write a place plan that was really just about what this particular piece of ground that they really value? Like, how small can a place plan be?
I don't think, and if anyone disagrees, do correct me, because there's no right, because I never thought about it before. I think there's nothing to stop a community doing that. So, I mean, the ones I've been involved with have purposely been looking at the whole breadth of issues facing a particular community or a particular area. But I can't see any reason not to do something that you just described, Kat. If a community decides, right, what's important to us is that green space, we'll do a plan for that. I can't see a reason not to do it. And I know from speaking with the government, so speaking to the chief planner in the government about all this, she's very keen not to see any constraints on local place planning. So I keep on testing with her, are the kind of things shown in those examples, are they stretching it too far? And she said, no, that's exactly the kind of thing that we're hoping to see. So I would encourage the community to do a Ferny Hill and go for a green space. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start with one of the questions that's been sent in. And then I've got Vanessa, who's got 4 questions. So do you think that's quite a lot? Perhaps we'll start. Could you type a couple of them in, Vanessa? Would that be all right? And I'll just ask this, and we'll hand over to you when I've just read out this question. So this is from Stuart Corbett. What support can local councils give to help communities develop their local place plan? What level of detail and analysis is required? How can we ensure a place plan complements the council's local development plan as an effective in shaping future development? That's a bit of a question I had as well around the advocacy that comes afterwards. How do you then advocate for your plan? Because I think you don't want it just to sit on a shelf.
Yes, well, those are huge questions actually. My starting point for Stuart would be the big block of links in chat, which I've put in there for 2013, have links to guidance. So the Planning Aid Scotland webpage has a link to a very good guide, which will be very helpful for Stuart, I think. The draft how-to guide from the government that's just above that will be useful as well. So I think that's helpful. But also, if the third thing that I've put into chat there, where are we with local place plans, that includes links to some local place plans that have been registered. In fact, to all of the ones that have been registered, there's 10 so far across the country. And I think if Stuart had a look at those 10, just flicked through them, that would probably, using those examples, give him a really good flavor of what to do in terms of content and amount of detail and level of information. Just two things. One is, I think it's really important to give people a little bit of background information, statistical stuff about their area, but not to overwhelm people, just to make sure that discussions are rooted in a bit of fact. So if it's that green space in Ferny Hill, for example, having some information about where the other nearest green spaces are in the area, for example, or having some information about how much it's used would be quite useful, just so there's a bit of information, a few hard facts to just to inform people's discussions. And the other thing that was your final question, Kat, sorry.
It was just about advocacy. It sort of related to the bit in the question that was sent in about, you know, how do you advocate for your place plan to be listened to after the occasion? Because it feels like some of the detail that's coming out of your place plans you've been writing needs to be reiterated to different parts of the council at different times. For example, housing, and things that are out with, and transport, etc., etc.
Yes, well, there's lots of answers to that. The one that's in my mind as we're talking just now is the Black Isle draft local place plan, which Vanessa's involved with actually, which has just been published in draft. One thing that we've done there to help is we've kept the local politicians involved right from the start. We've used the councillors, if that's not too bad a way of saying it. We've sold the thing to the councillors all the way through as being, look, we want this to be your mandate for the future. So we want you not to dictate what's in it, but to be happy with what's in it, to be happy with the process. So the councillors become an ambassador for the plan. And then towards the end of the process, just in the last couple of weeks, we've started to ask Kate Forbes as the MSP, can you get involved in the plan? She's written the foreword for the draft plan. There's a link in chat to it, which is really helpful. But more importantly, she now realizes that how she could be most helpful is when the plan is finished, she can help fight for what's in the plan using her status. So it's about assembling, I think Claire might have mentioned this earlier on, it's about assembling a kind of just thinking who can help you and how to work with those people. I think it's much better to see a plan as a partnership collaborative document, which if you need to use it to lobby and to push, then you can do, but to try to make sure that the people you need to deliver it with, to the council departments, that they know what's coming their way, and that you're not setting up for a fight, but you're getting them on board and they understand where it's coming from. A bit of a woolly answer.
I'm going to hand over to Vanessa now. Do you want to ask any of your questions that haven't been covered yet, and tell us about where you're based?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, as Nick said, I'm based in the Black Isle, and I'm a director of the Black Isle Partnership, which commissioned Nick to help us with doing a local place plan. And it's an interesting process because it's a very large community. It's about 10,000 people, scattered over about 8 or 9 different community council areas. So it's a dispersed community. And as it's been going forward, a few things have been occurring to me as potential issues, and they may or may not be, but I've put these in the chat. One is how you deal with issues that have not really come up in the community consultations, and key amongst those is the environment, because actually who comes to the public meetings may not actually be anybody who's got much environmental knowledge, and probably most local people are more concerned about housing and jobs and transport and things like that. So what do you do if it's not actually come up in a big way, but it absolutely should be covered in the plan? The other question, which sort of relates to that a bit, is how you ensure that these local place plans don't become a roadblock in the future. Now, the reason I say that is, you know, if, for instance, there are people in the community that really want to see something done and it's not in the local place plan, is that going to mean that A, it won't be prioritised by anybody, including funding bodies and the council and statutory bodies? And, you know, is that likely to happen? Could it become a roadblock to certain things that need to be done in that area? I'm interested in how other statutory bodies relate to the local place plan, other than the council. Do they have any mandatory reason for relating to it or not? And there is this long-term issue about governance, you know, which we mentioned a bit just then, and advocacy, but also in terms of trying to roll out the action, you know, as in an action plan, as opposed to just a planning plan. So those are the concerns I've got coming out of the Black Isle process at the moment. Interesting to hear what Nick has to say about them.
Well, I think it's very interesting to share those, Vanessa, because it helps other people see the kind of things that they might face as well. And there isn't time to give a full response to each of them, but I think number one is always in my mind, and I think each plan I'm involved with, I get a bit better at that. So I think it's really, and the environment is the big one, because that, just as Vanessa said. So how I try and tackle that is I try to make sure that the information that we give out to people about, so for example, Kinloch-Leven, where I'm working just now, people are massively focused on the village because of all the issues within the village, but there is a big rural area there, a lot of semi-wild land. So in asking people about their place, I think it's responsibility on someone like me to say, oh, don't forget you've got a really big wild area here. There's various problems that have been happening there, like wildfires, because the peat's been drying out and the roads are being shut from flooding. What's causing all that? Is that climate change? What should we do about that? So just asking the right question and giving a bit of information, I think, is a good way of bringing up the environment, and looking for people locally who are interested in the environment and getting them involved so that it comes out of the community as well, rather than it's just someone like me trying to catalyze it. So I think that's a really important thing. The roadblock thing, I don't think it's a huge issue, because I think it's very easy to write a plan that basically recognizes any plan gets out of date the day it's written. So therefore, you set principles which allow other new things to come along, and they can be supported as well. So I'm personally, I think that's quite easy to get around. I don't think that should be an issue. Number 3 is the Black Isle. If we have more time, would be a really interesting one to talk about, because we've spent a lot of time since we started back in March working with the local authority about getting departments and the NHS and people to engage in the process and to be comfortable with what's coming out of the plan. And that, it just takes time, but I think there's no substitute to working collaboratively. And number 4, we're working through just now. It's a really big issue. There's no right or wrong, but it's really important to think about delivery rather than just do a plan and stop. So we're working through number 4 on the Black Isle at the moment. And I've got various ideas of good models from other places, but none of them will be quite right to be copied in the Black Isle or copied somewhere else. It's got to be tailored.
Thanks, Nick. Got one more question that's come in on the email, and then I think we might have to tie it up for the day. But this is from Stuart Corbett. he asked what support can local councils give, which has I think come up. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Yes. What are the practical roles of the local place plans and development plan, and how much weight should the local authority attach to them? He asks whether we've moved away from developer-led local development plans, or are expressions of interest still to be sought? Is that
Well,
something you can answer?
First question, we don't know yet, because no LDPs have been produced on the back of local place plans, and we won't really know for a couple of years. But we should all be doing everything we can to make sure that local development plans do take account of local place plans, using all the techniques that Claire was describing earlier on of persistence, but also framing them in a way that it's easy for the council to take them on. And that's what I was getting at earlier on about how you frame your plan so it taps into national agendas. So that's the first thing. And the second question, sorry, can you remind me, Kat?
Oh, yeah, second question, sorry, it was have we moved away from developer-led local development plans, or are expressions of interest still to be sought?
Well, the
That
first
might
part,
be more of a question for Claire or Nikki. I don't
yeah,
know.
the jury's out. I see more, I work with more planners and local authorities who are becoming facilitators, but there are still plenty out there who are more regulatory, and more to the point, there are no end of well-resourced developers who are pushing to get what they want. So we're a long way from that yet.
Okay, thank you. Well, I might have to tie this up now. It's been really fantastic to have you, Nick. Thank you for bringing your expertise to this area of work. And I think we'll have some good discussions amongst ourselves in the office on the back of this. Thank you to the other speakers, to Nikki, to Claire, and to Sarah. It's just to remind you that we do have the one last event that we'll get up on our website as soon as possible. This recording will be sent out and it'll be up on the website if you want to read it, watch it again, or send it on to anybody. You can sign up as usual for our bulletins, both ourselves and Planning Democracy. And also you can donate to either of our organisations, because we aren't being funded to do these, and it would be great to get some donations in. So thank you, everybody, and I really look forward to seeing you at the next one. And do email us with any feedback or anything like that. Thank you, everybody.